A dangerous new chapter in Middle East tensions has unfolded over the past 2 weeks. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched a surprise military attack against Iran, igniting a direct and unprecedented conflict between the two regional powers. This sudden act of aggression quickly spiraled into a series of retaliatory strikes, drawing in international players and raising fears of a much wider war. The fighting has been intense, marked by missile barrages and aerial bombardments that have brought daily life in both nations to a standstill. The world watched with growing alarm as the conflict escalated, with each side vowing to respond forcefully to the other's actions. In an effort to pull the region back from the brink, the United States and Qatar stepped in to mediate. After days of frantic, high-stakes diplomacy, a ceasefire agreement was brokered. U.S. President Donald Trump personally announced the deal on Tuesday, June 24th, presenting it as a critical breakthrough to halt the bloodshed. The truce was scheduled to begin at a specific time, with the hope that it would create a desperately needed pause. This pause was intended to allow for de-escalation, provide relief to battered civilian populations, and open a potential pathway for more substantive negotiations to address the root causes of the conflict. The announcement from President Trump was initially met with a collective sigh of relief from the international community. Leaders from the United Kingdom and France had been urging restraint, and the ceasefire seemed to offer a glimmer of hope. The arrangement was simple in its goal. Both Israel and Iran were to immediately cease all offensive military operations. The success of this fragile peace depended entirely on the commitment of both governments to honor their word and rein in their forces. However, given the deep-seated animosity and the fresh wounds from the preceding days of violence, skepticism remained high about whether the truce could truly hold. Unfortunately, that skepticism proved to be well-founded almost immediately. The promise of peace was shattered before it could even take root, as the ceasefire collapsed within hours of its intended start. The very mechanism designed to stop the violence became another point of contention, with accusations and counter-accusations flying between Tehran and Tel Aviv. The rapid failure of the truce highlighted the profound lack of trust between the two nations. It demonstrated that a simple agreement on paper was not enough to overcome the powerful momentum of a war that had already claimed hundreds of lives and stoked immense anger on both sides. The ceasefire, announced with great fanfare by President Trump, was dead on arrival. The ink was barely dry on the agreement when both Israel and Iran began accusing each other of violating its terms. According to Israeli officials, their military systems detected missile launches originating from Iranian territory just 2.5 hours after the truce was supposed to have begun. This alleged act of aggression was immediately framed by Israel as a flagrant breach of the deal, justifying a swift and decisive response. The Israeli government insisted that it was acting in self-defense against an enemy that had no real intention of honoring the peace. Iran, however, presented a completely different version of events. Officials in Tehran vehemently denied launching any missiles in the hours following the ceasefire's start. Instead, they pointed the finger directly at Israel, claiming that Israeli forces had continued their bombing campaign well past the deadline. Iran's top security body stated that Israel had conducted strikes in 3 separate stages, continuing their attacks until 9 a.m. local time. From the Iranian perspective, it was Israel that had shown contempt for the diplomatic efforts led by the U.S. and Qatar, rendering the ceasefire meaningless from the outset and forcing Iran to remain on high alert. Caught in the middle of these conflicting claims was President Donald Trump, who had personally invested his political capital in the deal. He publicly acknowledged that both sides appeared to be at fault, but he reserved his strongest criticism for Israel. In a remarkable public rebuke of a key ally, Trump expressed that he was really unhappy with the Israeli government's actions. He stated, "Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before." This was an extraordinary statement from an American president, signaling deep frustration within the White House. President Trump's sharp words were followed by a direct and urgent appeal to Israeli leadership. He publicly called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to calm down and to halt the bombing operations immediately. "Bring your pilots home now," Trump demanded, a plea that underscored the severity of the situation. Reports later emerged that in a phone call, Netanyahu had told Trump that he could not completely cancel a pre-planned attack, but had agreed to scale it back. This exchange revealed a significant rift and a breakdown in communication, even as the region was plunging deeper into chaos and violence. With the ceasefire in tatters, both Israel and Iran quickly returned to open warfare, unleashing further destruction. In response to the alleged Iranian missile launches, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered a new wave of intense strikes on targets located in the Iranian capital, Tehran. This retaliation was severe and immediate. Reports confirmed that Israeli attacks continued for at least an hour and a half after the ceasefire was meant to be in effect. The renewed bombing campaign sent a clear message that Israel was prepared to continue and even escalate its military operations, regardless of the diplomatic fallout or international calls for restraint. One of the most alarming Israeli strikes targeted Tehran's notorious Evin prison, a facility known for holding political prisoners. This attack resulted in at least one confirmed death and caused significant damage, forcing Iranian authorities to begin transferring inmates to other locations. Striking a prison is a highly controversial act, and it drew condemnation from human rights groups. This particular target suggested a strategic decision by Israel to hit sensitive sites within Iran, aiming to inflict not just military, but also psychological and political damage on the regime, further inflaming an already volatile situation and complicating any future peace efforts. Iran, for its part, had demonstrated its own capacity for escalation just before the ceasefire was announced. On Monday, June 23rd, Iran fired a salvo of missiles at the Al Udeid air base in Qatar, a critical installation run by the United States. Iran claimed this was a direct retaliation for earlier US and Israeli strikes on its nuclear facilities. Iranian officials were careful to state that the attack was not aimed at Qatar itself, but the act was nonetheless a major provocation. Qatar condemned the missile strike as an unacceptable violation of its sovereignty and summoned the Iranian ambassador to protest the dangerous escalation. Following the ceasefire's collapse, Iran's top security body issued a stark warning. While denying any violation on its part, it declared that Iranian forces were fully prepared to respond decisively to any continued Israeli aggression. This statement signaled that Iran was not backing down and was ready for a prolonged conflict. The cycle of attack and counterattack was now firmly re-established. The brief hope for a pause had vanished, replaced by the grim reality of a widening war that threatened to engulf not just the two primary combatants, but also their neighbors and international partners who have a significant presence in the region. The human cost of this conflict has been staggering, especially in the short time since it began on June 13th. According to Iran's health ministry, the death toll within its borders has now surpassed 610 people, with the number of wounded exceeding 4,700. These figures paint a grim picture of widespread suffering among the civilian population, caught in the crossfire of aerial bombardments and missile strikes. Earlier reports had already confirmed that over a dozen children were among the dead, a heartbreaking reminder of the indiscriminate nature of modern warfare and the price paid by the most vulnerable when diplomacy fails. While Iran has borne the brunt of the casualties, Israel has not been immune to the violence. Iranian strikes have resulted in at least 24 deaths inside Israel. In one particularly deadly incident, an explosion in the southern city of Beersheba killed 4 people and left another 22 injured. These attacks, though smaller in scale compared to the Israeli strikes on Iran, have spread fear and disruption across the country. They demonstrate that Iran possesses the capability to inflict painful losses, ensuring that the conflict remains a two-way street of devastation, and that no side can claim complete immunity from the consequences of the fighting. The rapid collapse of the ceasefire underscores just how difficult the path to a lasting peace will be. The deep-seated animosity, decades of proxy conflicts, and a complete lack of mutual trust have created a chasm that cannot be bridged by a hastily arranged truce. Both nations view the other as an existential threat, a perception that hardens positions and encourages military solutions over diplomatic ones. President Trump's failed intervention and public frustration reveal the limits of even a superpower's ability to impose peace when the parties themselves are not fully committed to it. True de-escalation will require a fundamental shift in thinking that currently seems impossible. Ultimately, this ongoing conflict is a problem for everyone in the region and beyond. It threatens to destabilize an already volatile Middle East, disrupt global energy supplies, and draw neighboring countries and world powers into a wider confrontation. The fighting in Iran and Israel, coupled with separate but related violence, like the recent killing of civilians in Gaza, highlights a web of interconnected crises. Without a genuine and sustained effort to de-escalate and address the core issues through dialogue, the cycle of violence will continue, exacting an ever higher toll on innocent people and pushing the prospect of regional stability further out of reach.